We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered and movie review of the week. Since I watched a movie this week, Dune, the newly updated Dune. Denis Villeneuve as the director and Timothée Chalamet as the star.
Yep.
Yep.
I want to see it. Haven't seen it yet.
All right.
I know it's only half a movie.
It's only half a movie. It is part one, and it's labeled as part one right in the actual title sequence of the movie, so they're not pulling the wool over your eyes there.
No one knew that before they went to the theaters, though. It didn't say that anywhere else beforehand.
It is definitely not a complete story as is. It is half the story. I thought that the place where they ended it makes sense when it's planned to be a two-parter. And part two, we know, is going to be made now, so no worries there. We'll see the conclusion. So I will say this. I think it is almost an essential movie to have if you're a home theater fan.
Because of the audio. And
because of the audio and the video. Now, I have to say, for my taste, I wish Hans Zimmer would calm down a little bit, because he really kind of went overboard on this isn't just music, it is a cacophony of
character
noise. Because a lot of it is noise, I wouldn't consider it music anymore. It's just noise, but the visuals, fantastic. So from a visual standpoint, I think you gotta own it. And yeah, from an audio standpoint, there's lots to work out your home theater. So on that front, great. I had seen the older version of the movie, the one that had Sting in it.
Oh, yeah.
Whenever that one came out.
Some of my least favorite actors ever are in that movie, but right. I have seen it multiple times because I'm a huge Dune fan.
Sure.
So
I will say that, so I guess, it was written, in the 60s, right? Frank Herbert.
I don't know. Yeah, a long time ago.
And I mean, clearly all along influences on whatever he had learned, from the periphery of Arabic and Islamic. He's got Arabic and Islamic words mixed in there, not meaning what they mean in the real languages, but, thrown in there and that. So, all along it was kind of a white savior story. That's nothing new, but it's never, this version, Dune to me has never been this close to Lawrence of Arabia as this version of Dune. I'm like, this is Lawrence of Arabia. It's the exact same movie as Lawrence of Arabia, or half of it anyway. So and then by one,
I can't say I even remember what Lawrence of Arabia was about. I mean, it's been so long since
right.
I've seen it. If I even saw the whole thing, I don't even.
So
remember.
if Denis Villeneuve was not influenced by Lawrence of Arabia, I would be very surprised, because this is most definitely a science fiction version of that. I will say my one criticism, the famous scene, and they put it in the trailers and everything, of what's in the box, pain, right?
Right.
I never read the entire book, but I have read that scene, and in the older version of the movie, the description was that it's immeasurable pain, unimaginable pain, beyond comprehension pain, to the point that he wants to scream and he wants to pass out, but he can't because he'll be killed if he does. So it's tremendous, and the flesh is burning off your bones and all this stuff, to the point that when he pulls out his hand, he is shocked that his hand is not damaged. That's what the scene is supposed to be. It's a very affecting scene. Everybody remembers that scene from the old movie and from the book because it's told in that visceral way. In this version of the movie, it's that stings. So it really,
John Wick, settle down.
It really did not land. He kind of whimpers, and they're like, no, don't make a sound. I'm like, yeah, that's not enough. This was supposed to be a lot worse than that. It did not come across the type
that
of pain
actually worked really well in the first in the
first
older
movie.
Yeah. But I mean, I think they even showed the flesh and everything peeling off.
Yeah, and they did a little bit of that in here, but it was like he was picturing something far away. That scene just did not land anywhere near what you would picture that scene supposed to land. So anyway, I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of this movie. I didn't hate it by any means, but I will certainly say, home theater standpoint, you kind of got to own it from the visuals and sound. So that's my review of Dune.
I plan on buying it. I already told my wife she's not allowed to watch it with me because she's not going to like it, and I don't want to have to
And there
sit
would be
there
a lot of asking, who is that? Why are they doing this? Yeah.
Yeah, and, my wife, she's not the kind of person that hides her feelings really well.
Okay.
So she'll sit there and start yawning and,
yes.
moaning and making weird sounds. I'm just like, I know you're not having it. No, it's fine. It's fine. Get out. Get out.
Yeah, this is
You're
not a
having a good time.
fast-paced movie. So this is 2.5 hours, and it's only half of it, so it is not fast-paced.
Yeah. I will own it. I watched Don't Look Up.
Oh, good.
So which was ridiculous and yet all too familiar. So, yeah. My wife could not get over how weird Leonardo DiCaprio looks. I'm like, yeah, that's how he looks normally when they don't, when he's not like, these people who are very, who make good models or actors or whatever, a lot of times when you see, like, I've seen Daryl Hannah in person, and when you see these people, they're like weird looking because they have such unique features.
They're often very quite angular in real life.
Yes.
Because on camera, that comes out really well.
Well. Yeah, and he's just a little bit bigger than he normally would be, I think, for a movie. He's more of a, a heavier set.
He's not as skinny as he used to be when he was very, very young.
Yeah, well, and even, I don't know. I'm trying to think of what movies he's made recently, but... So that's the only thing she talked about the whole time. And I thought it was, all the cameos and stuff like that. My son was watching with us, and he was like, "Oh, that's Guillermo from What We Do in the Shadows." Oh, that's so and so, or maybe that was maybe that was Reacher that we saw him on. Anyways, it doesn't matter. There was all these different, like Timothy Chalamet was in there, and all these other things. So it was kind of nice seeing all these cameos. He's in demand.
Yeah,
he's also has an angular face.
Very. He is a triangular-looking man.
He is. So, and I can see why a lot of people watched it. I did like that more than, I think, almost the entire movie. I really liked the after or during credits scenes.
Oh, yeah.
Those were definitely worth the watch. It was like, you really wanted some payoff for some of the stuff that happened, and it was nice to see it happen.
I really enjoyed that movie. I had absolutely no expectation that it got nominated for a ton of Oscars, and I'm like, I didn't think it was that kind of movie.
Oh no, it's not that kind
I enjoyed it. I did not expect
it to get
Oscar
Martin
nomination.
Scorsese. I think that's what they're trying to do.
Weird.
All right, AVRant podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask by emailing us a question at avrant.com. You go to avrant.com. You can see our podcast episodes there. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast. YouTube.com/AVRant. You can find all of our stuff. You can go to, or I guess email us directly or contact us directly. It's Rob at avrant.com. His Twitter is at FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is at avrant_Tom. Did I tweet this week? I felt like I tweeted this week, or was it last week? I did say something to you, I think.
I think you retweeted my tweet about the iTunes thing, which we'll mention in our listeners of the week. So I think that's what it was. That's
probably what it was. All right, let's thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to patreon.com/AVRant podcast and joining to become a supporting listener every month. Patreon takes some money from you and give most of it to us. And we currently have 140 patrons over at patreon.com. So that includes Will and Daniel. And I guess we're going to be talking about the contest later, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So
people are anticipating, apparently. So
I can see that.
That was very nice. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the place to go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So yeah, big thank you to our 140 patrons now. That's ticked up. And Will and Daniel, thank you for being two of them.
Yes, and if you can't support us financially, do something else to support us and let us know what it is, or do it to us. Sometimes it happens. As in the case of these things, Will alerted us to the weird situation on iTunes with our podcast feed now stuck in the podcast archives.
Yeah.
Even though last week the podcast went through just fine, but now we're in the archives. The chances of me fixing this are about zero. Just so you know, iTunes is notorious notoriously hard to get to do anything. They don't
Okay.
respond to emails. They don't do anything. I have two problems right now with iTunes. One is they're telling me I need to update my banking information so that I can get payouts from some of the Bob books, right?
Yeah.
And when I go to do it, they have the wrong routing number for my bank. And I called the bank. They're like, yeah, that was the old routing number for the old thing, but the new one is this. I'm like, can you tell iTunes? No, I don't know. So iTunes, I emailed them and they were like, yeah, just, they basically gave me an automated response that was in no way helpful.
Yeah.
Or answering my, in no way indicated they had read the actual question.
No, I don't.
Like some bot just said,
yeah,
this is supposed to look for keywords and then send out this response. And then the support ticket I started for AVRant never got a response at all. So
Will mentioned that he's not able to subscribe to the podcast. Now, subscription on iTunes now means a different thing than it used to. Subscribe is a pay thing. What you're looking to do is follow, because we're not set up to take payments through iTunes anyway. We don't charge for this podcast. So you wouldn't actually look to subscribe to AVRant on iTunes anymore. You would look to follow AVRant on...
You can find us on any podcast feeder.
Yeah. No, but I mean, obviously we want to be on iTunes. That's the most popular one. Now, I mean, I was already following us, so that continues. Like, the podcast episode did get posted and updated. But, I mean, what I'm getting at here is I don't deal with any of that, so writing to me isn't really going to help. Tom deals with all the behind-the-scenes stuff, and like he says, can't get through to iTunes. But if you know how to solve this issue, if you could reach out to Tom
at avrant.com.
Yeah, Tom at avrant.com. That would be a help. So, Will, I don't know if it was just a matter of you very understandably looked for the subscribe button and couldn't find it. Now it's called follow. So that might be part of it. But in any case, I don't know how to solve this. So reaching out, hopefully the help can come our way, our direction this time, because we need some for iTunes.
You can become a listener of the week. All you got to do is fix our iTunes.
Yeah.
Because I'm honest, I don't know that I'm going to be able to do it. I've tried signing in.
Were you able to sign back into iTunes? Because even that was
I did.
You a problem.
I signed into iTunes. Okay. I found a way to sign into iTunes. I could not find the podcast.
Right.
Within, like, every time I went to, it says, there's the podcast or whatever. But I haven't signed in 15 years. I mean, I haven't had any reason to sign in whatsoever. I mean, why would I?
Well, there was the one change a while back where, I mean, for years now, it hasn't been AVRant-podcast.
I don't know. I've never been able to figure out.
Never been able to fix it.
Never been able to fix that either.
I don't know what was going on there. So we would like to fix all of it in iTunes. That would be really nice. If somebody's an expert on how to do that, please reach out.
Yeah. All right. We also got Brandon sent us some Movie Anywhere codes, which I will try to use.
Yeah.
I've not always been successful at such things, but I will try. We also got notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from Dan Gurinder. When Gurinder says, when J. Karl said we deserve a round of applause last week, he actually clapped while listening to the podcast. Yeah. So there you go, Gurinder.
Thank you. That's very nice.
You and me both. Michael Rohan, who says, please continue doing what we do. You're not the boss of me. I'll do what I want. Brandon, who watched 2 AVRant episodes back-to-back on his plane flight, so he's a member of the 4-Hour Plus Club. And J. Karl, who says he normally goes by his middle name Karl, but we already have a surprising number of Karls, so he wanted to differentiate. Oh, not even that time. Not even slowly. It's not even coming out.
It didn't work.
Differentiate himself from these doppelgangers. What? And doppelganger just like flows right out.
Yep.
But differentiate? Nope. Jeremy Martin, who's in Ireland, Martin says he really enjoyed our response last week about the Monolith 10-inch sub versus the SVS SB1000 Pro. So let me go over those again. Dan Gurinder, Michael Rohan, Brandon, J. Karl, Jeremy, and Martin.
Yes, indeed. I'll say the names one more time. Dan, or wait, did I thank Brandon? I didn't thank Brandon. So Brandon, thank you for the Movies Anywhere codes. And then Dan Gurinder, Michael Rohan, Brandon, J. Karl, Jeremy, and Martin. Thank you all very much for sending in those notes of gratitude to us. The notes of encouragement are definitely appreciated. And a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
That's right. We're going to have a giveaway. As we mentioned last week, James, House of Cards, is giving away his open box UMIC 1 and SPL meter. Nobody actually wrote in to suggest how we should pick the giveaway winner, but there was an uptick in Patreon supporters, so we're going to go with the Patreon thing.
That's
and
the
what
easiest.
I'll do is I'll just, so I guess it's at the end of the month, right? Or the beginning of the next month? Is that what we're doing for this?
Why don't we do it on episode 800? So that's going to be in like 4 weeks. So
Okay, so episode 800, if your Patreon information is updated or whatever and it works, then I will sort and I will use a random number generator to pick you.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's that one dude again,
Yeah, I know. It's quite possible.
what is the chances? It's good. Well, I don't know if you guys remember.
1 in 140 right now. It's really not that bad.
It's not that bad, but we've done this twice before, and the same guy got picked twice in a row, and I had to repick somebody else because it wasn't fair, but it was hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
All right, in the news, Infinite Gary. Infinite Gary says, all right, Lega sent us this news information.
Yeah.
Sound United is being purchased by Masimo, a medical technology company, for $1.4 billion.
Mm-hmm.
It is an initial confusing pairing, and investors seem to think so too, as Masimo's stock price took a dive after the acquisition was announced. Masimo's founder and CEO says he's a longtime fan and owner of various Sound United products and believes Sound United's expertise will benefit Masimo as they move towards a direct-to-consumer medical technology, while Sound United will benefit from Masimo's funding and R&D resources. So I guess they're going to be implanting things in us now? Is that what this thing is going to be? Is that... Do I finally get the internet port at the back of my neck? Because I'll be honest with you, those ports break all the time. I don't know if I want one implanted, so I don't know. This is a little strange. I don't really care that much.
Yeah.
I don't care. A lot of companies have a bunch of different holdings in different industries. Happens all the time. But can they buy Harmony while we're doing this? While they're just throwing money. Is he a big fan of Harmony remotes?
Indeed.
This CEO dude? Can we see if he likes the Harmony? Can anybody introduce him to a Harmony remote, please?
I don't know if Logitech even wants to sell it, but they aren't making money from it anymore, so I can't see why they wouldn't.
As well.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't really have much of a take on this. Like you say, I mean, the parent company in the background, handling the funding, that doesn't necessarily have to relate strongly to the products that you're buying. Yeah. So I don't see it as a huge downside. I mean, as long as they're saying, hey, Sound United, keep doing your thing, and now you have more backing, more funding available to you, that's not a bad thing. So
right.
Yeah.
I mean, these companies, and clearly I'm no expert at this in this field, but these companies must look at other companies that they want to acquire, and they see something of value that is not happening, whatever that thing is, and they may look at Sound United's portfolio and say, if we buy them and we spend X amount of money, we're going to get a massive return on our investment. So we don't know what this is. They clearly think it's worth $1.4 billion.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I'm sure Sound United's recent acquisition of Bowers & Wilkins, B&W, that couldn't have hurt. That must have helped them in their value, I would think, because B&W is a pretty well-known large brand. So in any event, I don't really think for us as home theater fans, I wouldn't anticipate this making big differences.
Yeah.
I don't see how it would negatively impact unless they just decide to shutter a bunch of stuff, which if they're the new owners, I suppose they might have the rights to do. But
I guess the only thing I would see, I would think, is they might want to streamline.
Yeah.
And you look at like Den and Marantz and all the different offerings they have that basically overlap, and you say, okay, is this worthwhile to continue to sell two competing products within the same marketplace? And with the major difference being that Marantz gets pre-outs.
Pretty much.
Go ahead.
No, that was it. I'm done on that one.
Okay. It might finally be safe to update your NVIDIA Shield to Android TV 11. Experience upgrade 9.0.1. Experience upgrade. Addresses 25 bugs from the initial release, including things like no longer breaking your Plex server, media server, allowing your external storage to work again, no longer losing all audio when you toggle on Dolby processing, not making all your Kodi media files disappear from view anymore, no longer randomly rotating images by 90 degrees.
Can you tell this was adapted from a phone program?
And the match frame rate feature is back to being labeled as a beta feature.
Yes.
The broken one.
We're not on Android TV 12 yet, and we know how smoothly that's going to go, apparently.
Yeah. So, yeah.
In any event, it seems like it's finally safe. If you, like I, were waiting on upgrading your NVIDIA Shield experience, because I did not press the button even though it bugs you every second that you're in the menu to do so. I was like, no, I would prefer my Plex to continue working. Thank you very much. So apparently this seems to get most things working.
My Sony X700 or whatever Blu-ray Ultra HD Blu-ray player wants to update, and every time I do, it's like it messes up, and I'm like, what are you updating? Like, what are you doing? What did you not do before? Is it the apps? Because I literally couldn't care less. Samsung's first QD-OLED monitor still isn't officially official, but there's a model number and specs available now for the ultra-wide 34-inch Samsung G8QNB.
That's the model number. I can't help it. It's G8QNB. No dashes or spaces to help there. I'm sure it'll be referred to as the G8. B is the thing that they're putting at the end of all Samsung products this year to denote that it came out in 2022. Is the letter B. But G8QNB. I'm sure the Q stands for QD-OLED.
Not surprisingly, it's the same panel and specs as the Alienware QD-OLED monitor, so it has a 3440 by 1440 resolution, 175 hertz refresh with VRR, variable refresh rate, 250 nits full screen brightness with 1000 nit peaks, and over 80% of Rec 2020 color gamut. No price or launch date. How much is the Alienware?
The Alienware is $1,300, $1,300 or $1,299. So
I expect it to be about like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Alienware usually doesn't go for the cheap. So if the Samsung were actually $100 less expensive, that wouldn't shock me, because it's not as though Alienware is, the TCL where they're known for undercutting or something like that. Right. So, I think it'll probably be the same price. Although the Samsung, according to the specs, is physically thinner. They went for a thinner chassis than Alienware's. Alienware's is bulkier.
That's because all the alien in there.
Yep.
The alien technology. You wouldn't understand. Brian, these are comments from our listeners. Brian says, we nailed it. Last week, Brian described how the signal from his Apple TV 4K would periodically go blank for just a moment, with the audio quickly returning and the video returning a few seconds later on his JVC projector, but it was only happening with SDR content, never HDR, which made it seem super unlikely that was an HDMI cable issue. Turns out he did have his Apple TV set to output HDR by default, and he was using the match range feature to bump down to SDR for SDR content. He didn't actually intend to have it set this way, but we said to check, and it was. He's now set it to output 4K SDR by default and used the match range feature for HDR content, and it seems to be working perfectly. Still weird, since he wasn't messing with the remote when the signal would blank out, but he's thankful to us for the fix.
So look at that. Good. It was a stab in the dark. I was like, given the parameters you specified, it was about the only thing I could think of. So hooray. We got it. We fixed it.
Dazz sent us an image with he's using leftover interlocking floor mats from the kids' playroom, and they seem to work just fine as a subwoofer decoupling pad, and that's just fine.
It is squishy without being so squishy that it goes right down to the floor, so no reason that shouldn't work. There you go.
It looks like he's got 3.
I see
maybe 2.
Yeah, that looks like 2 layers. 2 layers of the interlocking playroom floor pads.
And I will say, Dazz, this is a great excuse for you to buy a bigger subwoofer so it covers the entire pad.
Nice.
You might want to think about that. Bigger subwoofer.
Dazz doesn't need any more excuse. He's been thinking about it.
The larger pad, Dazz. That's AVRant approved advice right there. This is an aesthetic choice. This has nothing to do with performance. It's all about making sure that pad doesn't look funky down there. You want to cover the whole pad. Some questions. And I'm going to be honest, I am extremely tired today. So we will see how long this podcast goes.
I will try.
Joseph wanted to share his current 7.2.4 setup in this 13 by 15 foot room. 7.2.4 in a 13 by 15 foot room. Okay. He upgraded his front speakers to SVS Ultra, added a monolith at 7X amp or 7 times. I don't know. Is that 7X actually?
7X is it's the 7X, because that's the 7-channel version that had XLR inputs as well as RCA inputs. So they put the X on the end of it there.
Monolith 7X amp to his Yamaha RX A3050 receiver, installed monoprice alpha in-ceiling speakers, and added 4-inch thick DIY absorption panels. He's got plans for further renovations to the room, but for now he's greatly enjoying the experience, and he found Room EQ Wizard and his UMic 1 very helpful. I was able to achieve a better crossover, and it was actually better with the frequency set a bit higher than 80 hertz. So we've got some images here.
Yep.
It's a room with the projection screen and the rug. And it looks, is that hardwood underneath there? It looks like it might be.
I can't quite tell, but it looks like it might be.
Yeah, hardwood or tile or something. But he's got a big rug basically that goes from speakers to couch, so that's good. And the absorption panels, and he's got a little absorption platforms underneath his center channel there. So, and the walls are blue, it looks like, which are kind of nice.
Yep.
It's kind of different.
Blue,
black
and
up
everything's
front,
everything's
and
black on the ceiling, and black panels, black door, black trim.
Now it looks like he's got some or those are not images, those are actually things. There's like a Yoda doll or something.
Right. He's got some posters, and I don't think the posters are acoustic panels.
No, it doesn't look like it.
But he hasn't put them at reflection points anyway, so.
All right.
Yeah.
So he's got a question about his subs. He's got a pair of Klipsch SW115s. Those are 15-inch drivers. Front slot port 400 watts amplifier, and it's rated down to 18 hertz. One at the front of his room, one at the back. The sub in the back seems to be perfectly fine, but the sub at the front has a rattle. It's actually been that way for a couple of years, but he wasn't using it very often before this room was set up. Now it's annoying him, although it doesn't rattle all the time. It's really only sustained deep bass in movies that sets it off. Thumping bass and music doesn't seem to cause the rattle. He's popped off the driver. Dude, this was literally the first thing I was going to say, except I was going to say pop off the amp. And the amp, he popped off that driver and the amp and had a quick look inside, but he couldn't find anything obvious. Do we have any ideas? Furthermore, the budget committee would prefer he not spend any more money, but he can't help feeling like the subwoofer rattle might justify buying 2 upgraded subs. Max budget would be $2,500, so maybe a pair of the new Monolith 13-inch models or something from Power Sound to Audio. Jeez, is this not the 13 by 15 foot? Have we switched to a different room?
And it's got a door. It's enclosed.
Something from Power Sound Audio. He's also fairly keen on maybe getting some 18-inch Marty subs and putting them together himself. What do we think? I think, sir, you have a bigger room in your head than you have in your actual life.
Indeed. I know people love the notion of just overdoing the bass, but there's a point where you're spending a bunch of money. You have the ability to play that much louder. You have that much more headroom, and you just absolutely will never need it. There are Klipsch model subwoofers that I think overall, especially for store brands, are pretty darn good, but don't reach all the way down to 20 hertz. Not quite. They're not slouches, but they're not quite all the way down to 20 hertz. But you got the good ones. You got the SDW115s that genuinely play down to 20 hertz. They're rated down to 18, and they aren't lying. I see no performance reason or justification for you to get new subs. Where you might spend a little bit of money, because I don't know what the warranty situation is that if you can't figure out where this rattle from one out of the two, it's not both of them, it's one out of the two, if you can't figure out where that rattle is coming from, you might need to send it to a repair shop. Contact Klipsch first, get it to an authorized repair shop, and something might be done. He didn't see anything obvious. It could be a brace that was glued and came slightly loose. That's possible. And that visually you wouldn't be able to notice that. Typically when we hear a rattle inside of a subwoofer, it's a cable that's what is bumping against something. Sometimes there's like an entire screw that came loose, and you might not see it because sometimes it's stuck to the magnet, or it's like a little bit wedged inside the drive or something like that. Typically it's a cable, but I don't know. Maybe you wouldn't have spotted it because when you pull stuff out, you've moved where the cables are, and then when you put it back in, it puts it back into the place where it rattled. But if you're not able to figure out what is causing the rattle and solve it yourself, that would be something to have it repaired. But I don't see the justification to buy 2 entirely new subwoofers in this room size. You don't need an upgrade.
So I'm going to link you up to a Navy Gadgets article that I wrote that's called "Why a Big Subwoofer is Sometimes a Waste of Money." And the reason you are who I'm speaking to in this article. Okay, you are buying the bigger sub because you want it to reach. You want to have more bass,
right?
you're not going to get any more bass because you're never going to turn it up that
Yeah,
you're
because
gonna,
I mean, like,
you're gonna say,
these clip subs are capable of giving you all the bass you could ever possibly need.
well, and you're like, oh, well, I could get a bigger sub, and then it can go down to like 16
Right.
hertz or 15 hertz or 13 hertz. I'm like, there's exceedingly little content down that low, so little that I would bet any amount of money that you would like to bet that you could never actually say that you notice the difference between that.
No, I mean, if you do
Martys or
20
whatever.
hertz properly, then you're getting everything that is, because what we're actually detecting are the harmonics of something that's at 10 or 12 hertz. If you actually want to feel, if you like for real want to feel, not what people think they're feeling. People think they're feeling 10 hertz. They're not. They're feeling 20 hertz. They're feeling the harmonic when it's actually being played by the subwoofer. But if you actually want to feel 10 hertz, then put the money into some butt kickers, which, if you're anything like us, you'll use a couple times and then go, I don't actually like this. But that's fine if that's what you want to do.
This seemed like a better idea than it is in actuality.
It was better in my head than the reality of the outcome, but that you could do
It's
that.
kind of what my wife said after she married me. So,
but there's
it seems better in theory.
there's just no way that I can push you towards upgrading these subwoofers. And believe me, there are clip subwoofers where, as good as they are, I would be like, you could minorly justify it. You're only getting to 23 right now, and you could get to 20. But that's not the case in yours. You got the good ones. So, yeah.
So the things that I've found in my own life that have caused rattles in subwoofers that were not a broken subwoofer was things that my children have put inside of subwoofers.
That could be. It is ported.
Legos.
But you would have found that when you opened it up.
I would have thought you would have seen that. So this is what I'm going to suggest. The first and most common culprit is a wire.
Yes,
and
definitely.
So as you pull out that driver, as you pull out the amplifier, you almost certainly had to disconnect the wire from one or the other. So getting some like foam tape, not like the really soft squishy stuff, and lining that wire.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, when you reinstall everything, be careful, because what happened with me is I had the EP500 from Axiom, and I took everything out so I could take pictures of it because I did a review or something. I don't really remember. Oh, I had to switch out the amp because I blew it. But when I switched out the amp, the wire bent in the opposite direction than it did when I had taken it apart the first time, or when it was sent to me. So I ended up having to take it back apart, then rebend the wire, and it was fine. And it had the foam stuff on it. The other thing I would say is I would, like Rob said, I would touch all the braces, just kind of see if anything in there's moving. And I would also look at the port. And see if the port is secured as well as it should be, and you'll be able to see that from
being the
feel that from
slot
inside.
port, I don't even know if it's a separate piece, but certainly
It might not be.
Yeah.
It might not be.
But
might
it
just
might
be
too. It might have a flare inside that's a plastic piece, and so it's going to be any of those types of things. Certainly, if it were a port or a brace that's come a little bit loose visually, that would not be obvious whatsoever. So it might be really finely checking it.
What Rob said earlier about having a screw in there and stuck to the driver, that's more common than you think, because those magnets are extremely strong. Somebody drops a screw, it disappears as screws do, but you don't realize that it's actually stuck into the magnet, or like on the other side, like on between the spider and the magnet sort of thing. So you need to really kind of hunt around that driver and see if
the other thing to check is the grill, because it is definitely not uncommon for over time. He's owned this sub for some amount of time. I think on the Klipsch's, the grills are plastic. The frames are plastic. And having one of those little nubs having broken or bent is not out of the question whatsoever. And that can be the source of your rattle. So.
I've had more problems with magnetic grills.
Yeah, there's that too.
Than anything else. A magnetic grill, if the magnets or don't perfectly align, it'll rattle like crazy. So you've got some things to do. I think that, yes, if you buy bigger subs, what you are purchasing is the ability to not turn it up as loud.
Right.
That's all. You are literally buying the ability to say, instead of having my sub at 50%, which is what I have it right now, I now have it at 25.
And I doubt
that
he even has these subs at 50%, because in this room, these subs don't need to be that. These are 15-inch subs, ported 15-inch subs that genuinely hit down.
Unless his room is 80 feet tall, I really don't see that you need bigger subs.
Nope.
He lives in.
Sorry, dude. I know you wanted an excuse, but we're not going to be the ones to give it to you.
Hey, we agree with the budget committee.
Yeah.
You're going overboard. I think you have too many speakers in there anyways. I think the 7.2.4 was at least 2 speakers too many. Karl's been using a 65-inch LG C7 OLED, and the picture quality has been great, but he sits about 11 feet away, so he'd really love to get a larger screen size. Seems like he should go as big as he can in terms of new OLED, right? So an 83 inch is what he has in mind, but which one? I mean, it's so much cheaper just to move your chair forward. Just gonna throw that out there.
65, you can go bigger than 65 very easily.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, whatever. I'm just saying. So the LG C1 is 5,000, but there are lots of school shootouts where the Sony A90J came out on top, and that's down to 6,000 now. So the LG G1 has the OLED Evo panel, but it only goes up to 77. Is the picture quality so much better that would be worth taking the hit on the screen size? And then there are the new 2022 models about to come out. Should he wait for those? Gaming is not a priority, so he won't be using the built-in apps. So he just wants the best picture quality, and he cannot give up those perfect black levels. So what do we say? Yeah. So if he can't give up the perfect black, I don't know. Does the thing even fit in that alcove?
Well, yeah. There's room to either side on of the alcove, and there's room above and below. So yeah. You could fit an 83 inch in there. That's not a problem.
Okay.
Because that's a 65 now.
That looks tight to me. I'm saying that looks awfully tight to me.
No, there's definitely room to the side. Like the entire width of the speakers is to either side. So
I know. Yeah. I can see.
Yep.
But anyways, he's got his TV and speakers all in the alcove.
Yeah.
And along with a piece of furniture that has some of his gear and the center channel on top. If he posted this picture on Reddit, the first thing everybody's going to say is your TV's too high, which it is not. But that's what they're going to say because they're a bunch of...
No, given the distance that you are and it's angled down a little bit, that's totally fine. So, I mean, for me, it's really hard to say spend any more than the C1 costs because the difference in picture quality just isn't there. There are the occasional side-by-side test pattern and test material things, which is exactly what's going on in the shootouts, but that's just not real life. You don't have them side-by-side to compare like that. And I mean, the C1 image quality is already fantastic, and $1,000 is a significant amount of money. There are plenty of things you can buy with $1,000.
And this comes down to, and I personally have a big pet peeve when it comes to shootouts and looking at specs and comparing specs, just kind of in general. And that is, people look at these things, they're like, this is better than that. Therefore, there is never a reason to buy the one that's not as good. And too often on this podcast, what we're actually saying to you is, I mean, yeah, it's technically better. Like our last guy, like he's like, I want two 18-inch Marty subs. They're better than what I currently have. Yes. I mean, I don't know about the Marty subs, but the power sound audio or some sort of massive other stuff, it is better than the subs you have. You will not experience that difference, that better. Now, in the case of these OLEDs, you're looking at having something that is objectively a little bit better than something else, but in your room without having it side by side.
Certain parameters, only in certain parameters. For me, the difference is not great enough to spend $200 more, let alone $1,000 more. It's the price. I mean, if they were the same price, then whatever, get either one, because like I say, the difference just isn't there. The LGs have advantages in gaming, but gaming's not a priority, so that's not going to be the issue. The one question in my mind, because we don't know what the prices on the new C2 and G2 are going to be, those haven't been announced yet, and by all accounts, because LG has been successful in expanding their manufacturing, and because they're using a new process that's actually lowering the weight of the C2 and G2 units significantly from the C1 and G1. Not that those were heavy, but they're using a new composite material instead of metal on the backplane and stuff that's lowering the weight considerably. I don't know where the prices are going to end up. I really don't. I don't think it's going to be as low as the current clearance price, though. I don't know. I don't really suspect it's going to be the same price as when the C1 first came out. I think that's my prediction. I think the C2s will actually be a bit less expensive when they first come out versus when the C1 first came out. I think year on year there'll be a bit of reduction, but the price of the C1 on the 83-inch model has come down like $2,500 from when it launched, and I don't think it's going to be all the way down there. So the differences in image quality just aren't there to justify the price. I say snap up one of those $5,000 C1s while you can, because otherwise I think you're going to have to wait a year to find that same price again, and I just don't see the difference in image quality being, justifying $1,000 difference. So that's where I land.
Okay. Aras has a 77-inch LG C9 OLED and a gaming PC with NVIDIA RTX 3090 graphics card. With his old premium high-speed HDMI cable, he's able to plug in his 3090 into this Denon X6700H, get Dolby Atmos audio from his games, and pass through 4K 60 video with HDR, including Dolby Vision. Well, since everything in that chain is supposed to be able to support 4K 120, he bought two certified ultra high speed HDMI cables, both of which were recommended by Vincent Teo from HGTV Test, so we can blame him that nothing's working. One of them is a passive 6-foot cable to go from his Denon to his OLED. The other is a long fiber optic cable to go from his PC to his Denon, but he's having issues. Vincent Teo mentioned something about the LG C9 not being able to do Dolby Vision at 4K. What's the deal there? Can he game with 4K 120 with HDR in his LG C9 or not? I don't know.
So the LG C9, as on its own, is capable of Dolby Vision at 4K at 60 hertz. It is not capable of Dolby Vision at 4K at 120 hertz. To get that, you've got to bump yourself up to the C1. That was a feature that basically no other televisions in 2021 supported, was full Dolby Vision 4K 120 with VRR. On top of all that, the C1 and G1 from LG were kind of unique in being able to support that. So the C9 cannot do Dolby Vision 4K 120. It can do 4K 60. So Dolby Vision's all on its own is not a problem. There is a workaround if you're willing to spend $550 on an HD Fury 8K Vroom that allows 4K 120 Dolby Vision to work on a C9, but that's a $550 add-on for essentially a workaround. I don't really think it's worth it, but that's the situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Having the fiber optic HDMI cable going from his PC to his Denon and then Denon passing the signal through to his OLED just isn't working. Now that 120 anyways. The firmwares are all up to date, and he found the 8K enhanced setting in the Denon, turned that on. It just won't go. In fact, setting his PC back to 60 hertz also didn't work smoothly with the new fiber optic HDMI cable, so he's regretting having purchased it. He seems to be able to get a signal if he plugs his PC straight into his OLED, but then he isn't getting Atmos audio, and naturally he wants it all. Trying to use the 3090's other outputs to send video and audio separately isn't working out because the 3090 assumes that the Denon is a second monitor, and that messes up settings in Windows. It actually detects him having 3 monitors, since he also has a desktop monitor. Furthermore, when he tried just the passive 6-foot cable, he got some screen flashes and what looked like light snow on the screen. It's all just a bit of a mess. So, any ideas?
Okay, so number one question I have to ask is, do you have Windows and your RTX 3090 set to output 12-bit? Instead of 10-bit? Because the C9... Okay, so even though the C9 has 48 gigabits per second HDMI ports on it. Somehow, 2 years early, they got 48 gigabits per second HDMI ports. But the Denon is 40. The Denon can only pass through 40, so everything you're talking about will only work at 10-bit output, not 12. And when you activate Dolby Vision, it does default to 12-bit. So I'm like, okay, I'm thinking that, because I mean, especially that 6-foot passive cable. There's no reason that 6-foot passive cable should be getting any screen flashes or anything like that, but that would happen if you're trying to send 12-bit through the Denon. That could be an issue. So number one, make sure that your PC and your RTX 3090 are set to always output 10-bit, not 12-bit. And that might be the fix. As far as that fiber optic HDMI cable goes, there's a little bit of a question mark in my mind there, because when you're connecting your PC to your Denon via the fiber optic cable, you would have to, the fiber optic cable is directional. It is labeled with source and display. So you would actually have to have the source side plugged into your PC and what is labeled as the display side plugged into your Denon. Because that's the sync device. That's the device that's receiving the signal from the source, which is the PC. And as we mentioned, on the fiber optic cables or any of the active HDMI cables, the power for the cable is drawn from the display device, which in this case is the Denon, and I don't know if the Denon's HDMI input is actually supplying enough power to work nicely with a fiber optic or active HDMI cable. I just don't know. It's a possibility in my mind that might be where some of the issue is. Because if connecting the 3090 straight to the LG with the fiber optic cable was working, then I kind of have my suspicion that maybe the Denon's 8K HDMI
So what
port
would be the
just
solution? Just to return that cable and then get an active cable that is powered, like with a plug? Actually has to plug into something versus
right. I don't even know where to point you for that because I haven't seen one that has an external power into it. I haven't come across one. I bet
if he lowers that bit rate, he's going to have that's going to solve.
I think that's most of it. I really think that's most of it.
The thing that pointed me towards, at least pointed my thought process, because I would have said that it was a cable issue based on what you said, but when you said that you saw snow when you connected it
with
in
the
a certain
6
way,
foot cable, yeah,
that told me that there was a bandwidth issue because it usually a bandwidth issue is it happens at the cable side basically. Just trying to send 1080p or 4K through a bad cable, you get that snow. But we know you've got the good cable, which means there's something else going on, but it's still exhibiting the same bandwidth issue. Which is what snow ends up looking like. And we've seen that on. Well, we have an article about what does it look like on AV gadgets, and if it looks the way that, then it's exactly right.
So I have my suspicions about that 12-bit versus 10-bit. Now, the other side of it was he said if he connected the fiber optic cable straight from the PC to the television, then he wasn't getting Atmos audio anymore. You should be able to. Both your C9 and your Denon support eARC. So you should be able to get eARC to send Atmos audio from the television back downstream to the Denon. There's no limitation on that. In fact, the C9 was the last model year where LG still supported all the audio formats, including the DTS audio formats, via eARC. So that should work. I mean, if that's the workaround that gets this all working, is connecting the PC straight to the television and then just setting the audio downstream from the television to the Denon, there's no technical reason that shouldn't work. eARC should absolutely be able to handle the Atmos audio going in that signal direction path. So maybe you've turned HDMI CEC off in your LG, which of course we don't like CEC around here, and we recommend doing that. But to get eARC to work, HDMI CEC needs to be on in your LG television, and then at least the audio return channel part of CEC in the Denon has to be turned on, because that you can do individually from the rest of CEC. So that might be a settings issue there, because you should be able to do things that way. And if that's the workaround that works, that's not the end of the world. Plugging the long HDMI cable that's only for your PC straight into the television and then relying on eARC, that's not the end of the world. The only other thing that has me questioning things is you do have another monitor connected to this graphics card.
He kind of said that it actually since I have 3 monitors, because my other monitor, wait a second, what's this other monitor doing, and what's the capabilities of that other monitor, and is it in any way messing with this?
Yes.
He said he was getting it working before.
Yes,
so
but still. Like he was doing 4K 60 before, so maybe the monitor he has is 4K 60 and the monitor he has is not 4K 120. So all I'm saying is unplug your desktop monitor, and if it magically all starts working, then you know the issue is that, yes, even though that monitor isn't on, and even though the RTX 3090 isn't set to output to that monitor, it's set to output to the LG, just physically having them connected, as we know with HDMI switches of any kind, can cause all sorts of issues. So it's simple enough to unplug that monitor and see if it magically starts working, because that can be part of it too. I think we've covered all the suspects there.
So there's going to be a 97-inch OLED this year. Do we think there's any chance OLED screens will get even larger within the next few years? Vincent Teo was saying that 97 is the largest that can be manufactured at LG's current facilities, but new plants are always being built. So will OLEDs keep getting bigger, or is micro LED the only viable path to huge screen sizes over 100 inches? So there is no reason why they can't just keep making the world's large. I mean, they can keep increasing the size of OLEDs. The problems I see is that you have to start worrying about shipping, how fragile they are, and getting them into people's houses.
Yeah, there are logistic issues outside of just the manufacturing. And then in order to manufacture larger than 97 inches, they would need to build a new factory or renovate the existing factories. So this is they have not announced anything on that front of building or renovating to an even larger manufacturing facility, which would be necessary in this case. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just looking, like, I have a 92-inch screen behind me, this white blob that's behind me. If you're looking to me, that's my screen. And it easily goes into my door, right? You know what it doesn't easily do? Turn corners.
Yes, indeed.
Like, at all, or go upstairs. Yeah. It does not do that well. Of course, I assembled it in this room and just put it up on the wall. I mean, it wasn't like, but you can't do that with an OLED. So do I think that micro LED is the future for like the really large screens? I mean, yeah, it's what I think.
Oh yeah, because I mean, they're essentially making tablets. They're making frameless tablets, the modules, which they can do tremendously. You know, once they really get that like TFT backplane going on the micro LEDs, they're going to start churning these things out. If they ever get successful with the inkjet technology of essentially printing the micro LEDs onto a backplane, they're going to fly like crazy on the manufacturing. So, I mean, making tablet-sized screens that you then piece together at home makes so much more sense than building a 120-inch that you have to try and negotiate through your door and up the stairs. Like, forget it. That doesn't, logistically, it doesn't make sense.
My parents had their home theater in a bonus room that was upstairs. Now, bonus rooms are notorious for being hard to access because of, they weren't really meant to be rooms. So somebody built a staircase and just fit it in there. So trying to negotiate their 36-inch CRT up that thing, which was like a 300-pound TV back in the day. Or I mean, it probably wasn't 300 pounds, but whatever. It was really heavy. And getting it up those really tight stairs was a nightmare. Getting a 56-inch plasma up there, was a hassle. But when they moved out of that house and moved down to Florida, because that was up in North Carolina, the movers were like, we can't bring this down these stairs. And they're like, well, we got it up the stairs, so you figure out how to get it. I mean, they had to fight with the guys to get them down the stairs. And that was 56 inches. I mean, the technological question, can something be made bigger? The answer is yes.
Yes.
Logistically, are they going to do it? I think 97 is ridiculous. I think that, people are going to buy those TVs, get them home, and go, I can't get in the house. Right. I can get it into the house, but I can't get it into the room I want to get it into.
The LCDs that we're seeing that are 98 and 100 inches, those are actually the same size. This comes down to the little bit of waste material around, and the manufacturing isn't exactly the same. In terms of what size the manufacturing facility is, those are the same. And that's cutting a single display out of an entire sheet of mother glass, which all the mother glass was designed around 55-inch screen sizes. And they're like, can we get 6 or 8 55-inchers out of this one piece of mother glass? And now they're like, well, we'll just use the entire piece of mother glass to make one display. And now it's going to be this, enormous 100-inch thing. So that's what's going on there. Yeah, I just, honestly, the modular displays just make so much sense. I don't foresee any way that isn't the way that we go. We're going to go to modular displays. I'm convinced of it.
Well, yeah, I am as well. And the idea that, once they get those tolerances right, once they get the manufacturing process right, pumping out a bajillion of these little tablet size, even if they're like, 3 feet by 2 feet, you know what I mean? Even if they're like that size, you're not going to need this massive thing. And then if one of those isn't good, they toss it, as opposed to you have a 97
That's right. The whole thing, diagonal, the entire mother glass.
The whole thing's got to go.
There's a few pixels out of it, and you got to toss the whole thing. Forget it.
Yeah. Jonathan lives in Quebec. He'd like to get new seating, most likely 4 seats across, with a love seat in the middle, flanked by 2 more seats on either side. That's what I used to have. He'd like to keep the cost reasonable, so shipping within Canada and Canadian dollars would be a plus. Where do we recommend shopping in Canada? He asked the American. No, wait, he asked you. That's right, the Canadian. I'm going to get, how long is this going to take you to answer?
Oh, just a couple seconds, but I can go on to the next one. But
no, that's fine.
Because I really only have one really easy answer to point you to, and that's East Porters. East Porters is Canadian. They're in Ontario, but they will definitely ship to Quebec. And they sell Valencia. Valencia home theater seating, which is also a Canadian company. Lots of nice styles to choose from, really quite reasonably priced for all the features that are packed in there. You can definitely get the configuration that you want. Lots of people are buying Valencia seating. They're very popular online right now, and I don't have any problem recommending them, particularly in Canada, where you are getting actually a better price than just the conversion rate if you look in the US dollars, since they're a Canadian company. And yeah, you're keeping it all in Canada that way. So Eastporters and selling Valencia, and I think that is kind of the only answer I really have to give you.
I'm going to tell you, I still think that getting a regular sectional couch and building it into the size that the shape that you want it to be is better than getting home theater specific seating. I believe that in my heart of hearts. Not everybody agrees with me. Most of those people who don't agree he doesn't agree. Most of those people who don't agree with me have more than one place in their house to watch TV. Okay, I have one, and we use this exclusively to watch TV. And I think that home theater seating is not as conducive to that as. But if that's what you want, knock yourself out. Dan built 2 bass traps in his back corners. They're 8 feet tall, floor to ceiling. He used R38 fiberglass insulation, the pink stuff, cut them into triangles, and covered them with very breathable black cloth. Should he have used mineral wool insulation that is denser than the fiberglass insulation? Will the insulation he used still help with the bass? Would compressing the insulation and doubling the amount help at all, or just be a waste? Do not compress it.
You do not want to compress it and stuff twice as much in there.
That will not help. Nope. It is just fine.
It is totally fine.
Just fine. It is just fine. It's
wrong
harder
here.
to work with.
A little bit.
And that's why we recommend the other stuff.
Sure.
Okay. But this will work just fine. The only thing I would personally, it kind of, I mean, I don't know.
Well, he actually said he built like 4 things and then stacked 2 of them in each corner.
I think that's exactly right.
4-foot sections,
so that you don't have 8 feet of insulation just slowly compressing over time.
That's right.
So sticking a shelf in there every 2 to 4 feet to support
and that's what he said
the insulation and stuff like that. Yeah. I think that's exactly. If I was going to use pink insulation, this is what I would do. Yeah. And the only joys of not using pink insulation and using the rigid fiberglass stuff is that you don't have to do that. You just stack on top of each other.
Sure.
Never compress.
Yeah, the rock wool stuff it's a little bit easier to cut, but you've already done the cuts. It is a little bit more rigid, so you can kind of just stack it all the entire 8 feet. But no, what you have done is absolutely fine. There is no performance benefit to the rock wool. In fact, there are some people now arguing that it isn't as good as the fluffier stuff for the highest.
Who are those people?
Dude, you know how it is. Everything is out there. Every claim is out there.
I cannot stress to you guys enough how important it is for people to feel like they've got information that you don't have. Right. And the fact that information is superior to the information you have makes them feel
people
superior.
Will point at the third-party measurements of the various insulation and see, like, look, on this, rating of the sound transmission, there's a 0.02 difference. I'm like, yeah, you're not going to hear that. I know the number is not literally identical, but the effective performance is identical. There's no, acoustically speaking, there's no difference between what insulation you use. You can use the cotton-based stuff, the fiberglass, the rock wool. Acoustically, they're all the same. It doesn't have to be the one labeled as soundproofing insulation. That is pure marketing. Right. It makes no difference.
Soundproofing insulation. Somebody asked that recently on some. I think it was like on a Facebook question. I guffawed and scrolled. I'm just,
the only one
stop chasing specs, guys.
The only one that is genuinely different is the like styrofoam one, like the one you can stand on, the one that's meant to go on like a basement floor or like right up against a concrete foundation, like the one you can nail into. That is different because that's not fluffy in any way, and that basically doesn't absorb sound. It acts as a reflector because it is truly hard. So, I mean, that is still insulation, and that performs differently, but any of the bat insulation all performs the same. Yes, I know there are 0.02 differences in the measurements from the forget that. They're effectively all the same. So what you have done, fantastic. Big thumbs up. Don't change anything.
JR has a 7.2.4 system set up in his basement home theater. At present, he's using B&W medical grade speakers.
They are now.
You could start marketing them as such. They are medical grade speakers. Just like the audiophiles love to talk about their aircraft grade aluminum and medical grade outlets and stuff, whatever the heck those are. Anyway, it's got B&W speakers with dual SVS PC2000 Pro cylinder subs and 4 SVS Prime elevation speakers. That's all handled by a Denon X3700H. He also has a 5-channel Rotel amp with 200 watts per channel for the 5 main speakers. Tower speakers, he's sitting 6 feet away, 7 feet away from, something like that. Not too far.
Definitely not too
his
far.
couch is on the back wall or very close to it.
No, there's a whole
there's
space
something back
behind him there. So there's plenty of
it's
space
just an
behind.
optical illusion on that one picture. I see it. Yeah. Most of the time in the theater is spent listening to music. He spent a few months auditioning speakers, decided on getting the Sonos Faber Olympia Nova V towers. Now, I will say, I appreciate Sonos Faber, or whatever the heck their names are, not having random numbers and letters stacked up together, but Olympica Nova V.
Yes. Nova.
Towers
and that's a
is
5 because they go
whatever.
I and IV and V.
I know how Roman numerals work. Thank you. He feels quite certain these are endgame speakers for him. They snap. And he thought they were a significant upgrade over his B&Ws. He'll have to wait a little while for them to be delivered, but he's excited. In the meantime, he's been researching how to maximize the performance. That's led him to thinking he needs a dedicated, 2-channel integrated amplifier with the following features. Do I have to read all the features I'm just going to say no to? Or do I have to read all these? I'll read them.
Yep. Just so
I'm going to read them, but let me give you
this
too
to
long.
get into JR's mind. We have to understand.
Okay, JR, let me tell you something about those speakers. They're going to be fine without all this stuff. You're sitting like 7 feet away from the speakers.
And he has a Rotel 200 watt per channel amp.
You've already got more amplification than you needed. I was already going to tell you didn't need that Rotel amp to begin with, and now you really don't need that.
To be fair, the Sonos Fabers, they are 4-ohm speakers. If you had 11 of them, and we're trying to power all 11 of them, well, you couldn't power all 11 with the X3700H, but trying to power 9 of them, if you had 9 identical 4-ohm speakers, we're getting into the territory where that's a challenge for a receiver. But you already own a 5x200 Rotel amplifier. But regardless, this is what he has researched and believes he needs in a dedicated 2-channel integrated amp.
This is where it happens when you spend too much time on the audiophile subreddit. Okay? Don't go there. It's full of misinformation and BS. 400 watts per channel. This is what he thinks he needs. 400 watts per channel into 4 ohms to maximize the Sonos Faber's speaker's power handling. Superior room correction. What's superior? Anyways, superior room correction bass management so that you continue using this dual subwoofers for 2-channel content. A great DAC, which is exactly the same as every other DAC on the market. Clean input for his 2-channel sources. I mean, I don't know why your other other amplifiers have dirty inputs. I mean, you heard the dirt somewhere. And a home theater bypass unit so that his Denon can continue to handle the Atmos setup and just output the front, left, and right pre-outs to his integrated amp. So he's talking about spending literally thousands of dollars at this point.
Yeah, we're into the over $1,000. Yes.
Yeah. He's found a model that checks all those boxes in the Anthem STR, which does not stand for strength, but should. It should have like a bicep on it. And so his question is about how he would connect his subwoofers. That's not the question we're going to answer, but that's the question you have. He emailed Anthem and they suggested that since he has already dialed in his subwoofer setup using a single subwoofer out from his Denon and using a Y splitter to send a mono signal to both subs, so he does listen to us, just like we recommend, he should keep that just as it is and just use an RCA switch. So the subwoofer output to the Denon and the subwoofer output from the Anthem would both go into the RCA switch. Then a single output from the switch would go into his existing Y splitter and feed the 2 subs. Then he would just use the RCA switch depending on whether he was using the Denon for Atmos or the Anthem for dedicated 2-channel listening.
Okay, so as wrote, what you have proposed will function perfectly fine.
It will function.
That is totally fine functionally, and you can absolutely get an RCA switch at a very low price. I don't know if we'll meet your audiophile standards, but as far as functioning, what you have proposed is totally fine. And if you are dead set on doing this path, I like Anthem. I have no problem with that. If you look at the interior of that STR, there's a whole lot of empty space in there because nothing they're doing is that complicated, but it has a nice big fat toroidal transformer in the middle of it, and I have no problem with it. It is going to sound fantastic. If you're dead set on doing this, everything you proposed will function just fine. There is the alternative option, connection-wise, where you could actually, in your Denon, set it up to say you have no subwoofer in the Denon and just set the front, left, and right channels to full range.
Right.
And actually output those pre-outs to a regular stereo input on the Anthem. Not the theater bypass, but a regular stereo input on the Anthem, because then you could use the Anthem's bass management to take all the bass, because all the bass in this scenario, including the low-frequency effects channel, will be going into the front, left, and right pre-outs, because
as long as you put all the other speakers to small.
Yeah,
in your
yeah.
Denon.
You put all the other speakers to small, but you put the front, left, and right speakers to large and the subwoofer to none in the Denon, and now all of the bass, including the LFE, is going to those front, left, and right pre-outs, and then you would actually use the Anthem's bass management to separate the bass from the 80 hertz and above and just continue using that. So you don't have to have the RCA switch. You could set things up that way. You would not be using the home theater bypass on the Anthem. You would be using a regular stereo input on the Anthem and relying on the Anthem's bass management. So those are two ways of doing everything that you've proposed, which, like I say, will function just fine. It'll sound fantastic. We don't think you need to do any of this at all. We would 100% continue to just use your Denon. Like I say, you've already connected the 5-channel, 200 watt per channel Rotel amplifier, which from your seating distance has way more headroom than you need for your new Sonus Faber speakers. So, like, there is no difference in the performance of the DACs. Right. If you're talking about clean input, you just put DACs and clean input together. If you have DACs, that means you're sending a digital signal to the Anthem. There's no difference in the cleanliness of a digital signal.
Those zeros and the ones. Some of them are 1.1s
Right.
and some of them are 0.2s or something.
It's either binary imperfect or it isn't. So there's no difference in the cleanliness of the input of your 2-channel sources when you're talking about also having a DAC involved. So, like...
So the problem here is that there are a lot of people who are going to tell you that they did this and they heard a massive difference.
Right.
And I'm here to tell you that not only they did not, they are almost certainly lying. Now, maybe not to you; they might be lying to themselves, but they are lying.
Well,
and they may not be doing it on purpose either.
Yes. Because going from the Denon setup and just putting that into stereo listening mode, but you still had Odyssey active and all that stuff, and then they switch over to their dedicated, separate 2-channel integrated amplifier, and they hear a difference. I'm not going to say it's impossible to hear a difference having switched those things, because there are multiple variables
going on, right? Not only that, I mean, so I wrote the article over AV Gadgets, just talking about which room correction program is the best. It's something we talked about a lot over here at Dirac, Odyssey, YPAL, but you can throw Anthem into this as well. Can you hear a difference going from one to another? And the answer is yes. But it all comes down to target curves and how they. I mean, if you go and you are very meticulous about how you set everything up, Anthem, YPOW, Odyssey, Dirac can all sound exactly the same. And believe me,
they can all measure the same too.
The amplifier is not going to make a difference. The integrated amplifier is not going to make a difference. None of that's getting some of the functions that are in your receiver and not having them in your integrated amp is not going to take away noise that you think you might be hearing, or that people say that you're going to hear. None of this stuff is going to make a difference. If you could A/B what you're proposing to do with your current receiver, if you heard a difference and you were, it would almost certainly be because of the differences in the room correction target curves.
Yeah, well, like, to be fair, when we talk about this stuff, this is Tom and Rob, and both of us know and are willing to do the manual setup side of things.
Right.
Because what we're getting at from our point of view is we don't want to spend the money if we don't have to. And because we have the knowledge and we know from all the blind listening that we've done that you can make these two things sound identical, we're like, okay, well then I'm not going to spend the money to make them sound identical when I can get them sounding identical. But to be fair, when you just take it out of the box and you rely on the default target curves and you do that stuff, there are differences there. And if you either A, don't have the knowledge, or more likely B, don't want to put in the time, like I don't have, like, this comes up all the time with Infinite Gary. He likes to use
about thousands of dollars potentially.
I know, but if money means less to you than time, which
that's true.
It's not the case for Tom and I, but it's the case for a lot of people. Money means less to them than time
I have a kid that's going to college next year.
Right.
Believe me, my time is worth nothing. Okay,
compared to the dollars.
Compared to how much money that boy wants me to spend on his college. And I keep telling him, I hope there are websites that have scholarships. You need to visit them, because I don't think you understand how little money doing online content makes these days.
But like, yeah, I get the side I was mentioning, you know, with Infinite Gary, he likes to take things out of the box, use them with their default settings, and evaluate and compare. Hey, this one, the way it sounds when I set it up versus this one, the way it sounds when I set it up. But I didn't dig into the minutia. I didn't put hours into the setup. I didn't do a bunch of trial and error. I used them out of the box, and I like this one better than this one. I'm like, that's completely valid and reasonable. When the money means less to you than the time, or you just don't want to dig into all those settings. Because
I would venture to say, though, that if you actually sat there and listened to your the Denon setup with the Rotel amp versus the if you could A/B, you'd go, I mean, maybe they sound a little bit different, I guess. I can hear a little bit.
The Odyssey target curve by default is different from the Anthem target curve by default. So if you heard a difference there, I'm not going to say you're wrong. We will argue that with the time and some trial and error, you can manually manipulate either of them to sound like the other one. But by default, if you hear a difference, we don't have an argument there. But we just don't see the value, because you are talking about thousands of dollars. And if you were willing to do the dual subwoofer setup based on the way we recommend doing dual subwoofer setup,
which is not the easy way.
I'm like,
believe me, I was irritated when I did it. Rob made me do it, and I got irritated. So believe me, I understand. If you want like the perfect example of AVRant's actual like advice being used on somebody who is a longtime listener and yet still kind of bought in halfway into some of the stuff that you hear online. Andrew's a perfect example.
Okay.
He had a ton of gear. He had an external DAX. He had all the external amps, all this other stuff. And then he started working with me on AV gadgets, and I'm like, we started, I'm like, well, just take that thing out and see how it sounds, or then just do this. And he has sold half of his gear. That is not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
He is down to almost nothing.
Yeah.
The only reason he keeps a CD player is because he likes putting CDs in a disc, in the disc tray, and he likes that feeling, I guess.
Yeah,
He's like, it doesn't sound.
He also recently replaced his Denon receiver with an Onkyo. I mean, mainly because he wanted to get one of the brand new Onkyos, and also, he hadn't used Dirac before. Let's try it out. And he's like, yeah, the results are great. The Onkyo receiver is great. Dirac doesn't sound that different from Odyssey, and you can get them sounding identical really without that much effort. And then the Denon setup process was so much easier, and you didn't have to know very much, and it just walked you through it, whereas the Dirac process was much more less user friendly. So this is what we're getting at in terms of, if you are willing to put in some of the time, you can get these results. So I mean, that's where we end up landing. You can also go back to Lee Overstreet's, our hour and a half long talk about the SP2000 Pros, where he's like, yeah, I did Rob's 12-step setup. He's like, why did you make me do that? It turned out that when I just plopped them down where you said, geometrically you should plop them down, the first result was not really any different from the last result, except for the hours of time and tedium I put into it in between. So, there's that going on. Do as we say, not as we do. I don't know. No, we did it. We did it. We can't say we didn't do it. So.
Believe me. So if, like you said, if you just want to have an integrated amp, if you just want to do all this stuff, that's fine.
Yeah, because like I say, the results you're going to get are going to be, they're going to be great.
This is the problem I have here, which is, how to he's been researching how to maximize their performance. You can already maximize their performance right now. You need nothing more to maximize their performance. Okay, so if you're going to spend this money to make them sound as good as they can, you are wasting your money. If you want to spend this money because you want to integrate the amp and the 2-channel and this other stuff, knock yourself out. But just don't tell me it's because you needed this to make them sound good. They are going to sound nearly identical and could sound identical with the gear you currently have. So
there we go. We've said our piece.
We've said our piece. God, my nose is itching like crazy. I feel like a coke addict or something. Like, don't watch the YouTube video. It's driving me nuts. Like I got a weird mustache hair that's like pointing up or something. I don't know what's going on over here. I need more coffee or less coffee. Maybe that's the problem. I started drinking coffee really early this morning. still going. Gurinder's speaker setup is all Polk LSi series. For his floor level speakers, he's got LSI FX surround speakers, which can be configured as either die or bipole. They're the standard trapezoidal shape with angled drivers firing forward and back, and they stick out about 10 inches from the wall. His room is very narrow, about 10.5 feet wide. So anybody trying to get to the back row of seats has to shimmy by the surround speaker sticking out. His wife prefers to sit in the back row. I always think it's funny when people want to sit in a row that's not the same row as everybody else. I mean, what are you doing back there? I mean, you sit.
Too big,
are you looking
too
at your
loud.
phone? I don't. How much quieter can it be back? Anyways. So she appreciates surround speakers that didn't stick out. Gurinder is thinking this is also an opportunity to upgrade to 2 pairs of side surround speakers, one for each row of seats. Because if you're trying to get away from the sound, I'm bringing it to you, woman.
At least from the surrounds, not the fronts. The fronts are a little bit quiet.
There are Polk LSi series and wall speakers. The current models were a bit expensive, so getting 2 pairs would be over his desired budget. He found a pair of the previous LSi generation for sale at a lower price. Should he stick with the Polk LSi series in-wall speakers, or is there a different brand of in-walls we recommend that would match his Polk LSi front speakers? In-wall speakers are a bit tough. And as far as Polk tends to have a little bit more of a sound, but not.
And the LSIs in particular, they're pretty characteristic.
That being said, these are surrounds.
I know.
So I'm kind of torn between telling you. Well, first of all, if you found like an older version that still that still reportedly sounds similar to the newer version, which they should, then and they're in your price range, I'd probably jump on those. But yeah, I mean, the other option would be to buy in-wall speakers that are of a brand that you want to upgrade the rest of your speakers.
Well, that's kind of coming up in his future questions.
And then just get those and then say, oh, I'm going to eventually, in your mind, say I'm eventually going to upgrade everything else. Right. And just don't tell her.
Yeah. See, like in my mind, most of the time, the lion's share of the time, I'm not going to say you need to get matching surround speakers to your front speakers, but that's when it's the type of speakers that we recommend all the time around here, which are pretty darn neutral, transparent, tell it like it is, which means any other pretty darn neutral, transparent, tell it like it is speaker is going to match very easily, especially as the surrounds versus the fronts. But the Polk LSIs, like Polk already tends to have a little bit of a character to their sound, but the LSIs in particular have quite a distinct character to their sound. And to me, it's enough that I would spot the difference in my surrounds versus the fronts, because it's a pretty standout difference. It's kind of like, okay, if I had Klipsch fronts and B&W surrounds, am I going to notice the difference? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to notice the difference between those two speakers, even in those positions. So to me, this is the one instance where I'm like, if you're sticking with your LSI fronts, I would err on the side of getting LSI in walls as well. But I would have no problem using the previous generation along with the current generation, which I think is actually the very next question anyway.
Right. So I'm going to say that I'm going to enable you maybe to what Rob's saying is almost certainly true, is that Rob would notice a difference as things were swirling around the room. First of all, it would need to be swirling around the room. I think most of the time you're not going to notice, like, unless there's that individual sound that's going through all the speakers in most of the cases. And almost certainly you and your family is going to be the only person who's going to notice it.
Right.
Like no one else is ever going to notice it.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So you can get whatever speakers you want for your surrounds that are in walls that fit the budget and the bill. I would only buy speakers that I wanted to match later on. I would not buy but which could be any of the flat speakers we normally recommend, and then you could pick whatever other one of the flat speakers that we normally recommend for your fronts, and it would work just fine. But like I said, always chasing specs, always worried about these little differences. This is a difference that what Rob is basically saying is there's enough of a difference here that there's a very good chance you're going to notice it. Whereas in some of the other things that we're talking about, we're like, it's just, it's so little, you're never, the chances of you actually noticing a difference are so slim, it's not worth the cost. So, and even in this case, I'm going to tell you that the chances are you're the only one's going to notice, like, full stop.
I agree with that.
And then, how much is it going to bug you? I don't know. I am fairly, I notice these things if I'm listening for these things. But when I'm in a movie and listening to a movie, I very rarely even notice whether or not the sound's coming from above or behind or whatever. It has to be very, very obvious for me to go, oh, yeah, look at my Atmos speakers are doing something. He says if he gets one pair of the current generation, one pair of the previous generation, will that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would imagine it would be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So should he wire the two pairs of side surround speakers in series or parallel? And what if the new gen and the old gen don't perfectly match? So I always get this wrong. A series, right?
You want to go
series.
Yeah, you want to go series.
And if they don't perfectly match, I don't think it's really a problem. I mean,
there's the very simple solution of you just put the matching pairs. So let's say the old generation goes on the left and the new generation goes on the right.
Oh my God, that would drive me nuts.
No, but these are going to be so close anyway. Like, this is if they have a slight efficiency mismatch, so you can't actually properly set the trim level for your left side versus your right side because you have one new generation at the front and the old generation at the back, and the levels don't match. But if you put
I would not have thought to do it that way.
Yeah.
I would have thought what he's thinking, which is you put one pair at the front and one pair at the back seats. But yes, Rob's right. Put them, as weird as it sounds, put both of them on the left and then the other two pairs on the right.
Yeah, because
wire them in series.
The timbre is not going to be the mismatch. Where the mismatch might be in the sensitivity. And now you can still have the matching trim levels on both sides by having the new pair on the left and the old pair on the right, or vice versa, whatever, rather than front and back. And definitely wire in series, just to go over that again really quickly, because you don't have to wire the wires inside the walls. You can still have the wires come back to your AV receiver, all of them. And what you would do is the red output of the amplifier goes into the red input of speaker number 1. Let's call that the front speaker on the right hand side. So red to red. The black output of the amplifier goes to the black binding post of speaker number 2. So let's call that the back speaker on the right side. So it's red to red, black to black, but it's red to speaker 1, black to speaker 2, and now the two remaining ends, which would have been the black end from speaker number 1 and the red end from speaker number 2, those just get connected together. And that can all happen back at the AV receiver, right? You've got all the speaker wires coming back there. You're just going to twist together and put a speaker wire nut on the red to black of speaker number 2 to speaker number 1, or the black to red in this case. So there you go. That's how you wire them in series.
Yeah, and I have there's an article that I did not write. Clint wrote a long time ago, but it's called Speaker Impedance Rating. So it's the name of the article, but it describes the series versus parallel in there. So you have that. He asks, how problematic would it be if his surround speakers end up being a different brand than his front speakers? We've kind of talked about this already, but he's mainly thinking of a future where he might replace his Polk LSi fronts if he's installed the Polk in walls, would that would be a big hassle to also replace those. So should he consider the future and get something other than Polk in walls now? Like I said, I think that if you do, you get something neutral, flat. One of the things that we normally recommend, we got the Empyrean in walls are ones that kind of pop up quite a bit. I don't know where his budget is. He hasn't really said.
No, he hasn't really said. I'm not that huge on the current Empyrean in walls. I like the previous generation a lot more. Yeah. But like Sonance, available at Best Buy, very neutral, works with anything neutral. Kef. I like Kef's in walls, although they're not cheap. They're kind of overpriced, in my opinion. You could actually just go with the monoprice.
Go to Accessories for Less then, because they resell Kef.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And let's see if they're up there. I'll go.
Yeah, you could actually go with the monoprice alphas, but I think he's looking to upgrade. Those are those are pretty entry level. Like, I kind of really like the Sonance these days because they're widely available. The ones they have at Best Buy are not crazy overpriced. You can get backer boxes for them. Like, we used to recommend RBH all the time, but it's pretty hard to get RBH anything these days. So yeah, we're kind of running out of really nice options for in-walls. It's kind of like Monoprice or Sonance. That's where I've kind of landed these days.
Yeah, I guess that. Yeah, I wasn't listening. So if you said something about the THX versions that they have coming out pretty soon, or that have come out.
I mean, there's Focal. I like Focal's in-walls a lot, but they ain't cheap. So
Kef's got the 6.5 inch in two-way in-wall in ceiling speakers for $230. I don't know if that's a pair.
Yeah. Oh, you know what else? There's the Monoprice THX in-walls too. Those actually might be a really good option.
Didn't I just say that? Monoprice THX? Didn't I just say that? What did I say?
I thought you said Kef THX.
Oh, I meant the Monoprice. Sorry.
I might have misheard you too. We both might have misspoken, misheard. No, okay, yeah. But anyway, yeah, the Monoprice THX could definitely be an option. There's
a couple of options for the Kef's in walls here. We've got the CI 160.2s, and they're all on accessories for less. For fairly
that makes
inexpensive.
The price more reasonable.
So I would consider going to accessories for less and checking that out. I'll just link this. I'll just give you the link. I mean, it's not like a fantastic link. It's just searching for Kef on whatever.
On accessories for less.
On accessories for less.
It's
not like my Google foo is very strong. All right, Michael's parents are building. You know what? Let's go back for a second. If you did end up getting nothing but Kefs, that would be a great idea too. Kef just released their new reference. Kef just released a new blade metas. So the reference meta, the blade metas have just come out. We've already seen the meta material in the
LS50s, LS50 metas. Yep.
So you can expect now that they've released it in these other two products.
Have the meta material.
Everything's going to get it.
Yep.
So in the next couple of years, or maybe even the next couple of months, you're going to see a lot more Kef products that have that sort of thing, which means that the current version of Kef products are going to be on sale. So this is a good time to buy Kef. Michael's parents are building their retirement home, and they've tasked Michael with planning a large home theater. They have large gatherings on a regular basis, so a minimum of 12 seats in the theater is non-negotiable. They have a very healthy budget, so an appropriate room size for this is not a problem. Michael's initial plans include 3 rows of seats with 4 or 5 seats in each row. 12 seats, 3 rows of seats for 4 times. Okay, yes. So how many speakers would we recommend for a large 3-row setup like this? In his mind, he started with a 7.4.4 configuration for a single row, and then added more side surrounds and overheads, maybe front wides too. That got him up to like 13.4.8 into his Trinnov altitude and that is into the Trinnov altitude territory. This is not out of the question, but it's also a huge price jump over, say, a 16-channel processor. So what do we think the configuration should be? So you're really looking at more of a whole, like a real theater type setup. Here, we can definitely help with this. This is getting into the size of room where having a custom installer like at least consult with you on it. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but for the most part, you should be able to design most of this yourself. I don't necessarily think you need to go with 13 point whatever the heck it is.
No, I mean, he was just like, if I have a pair of side surrounds for each of the 3 rows, and then if I have overheads for each of the 3 rows as well, like, you don't need more than 6 overhead speakers. I'm just going to stop you there.
Yeah, I think
you don't need more than 6 overhead. 6 overheads will be absolutely fine.
Yeah. So I would put top fronts in front of the front row, top
just a little in front,
backs, whatever, and a little in the back of the back row, and then top middles in the middle.
And I would definitely, in this case, I know they've said this is the type of gatherings we have in that, but the back row being not quite as good as the other 2 rows, that's going to be fine. In fact, what you could opt for is, 6 seats in the front row, 6 seats in the second row, and then still have a third row in case they have more than 12 people. But like, that's really not that difficult to do. That could be, 3 love seats in each row, which is totally doable with whatever type of sectionals or home theater recliners that you want to do. 3 love seats for each of the first 2 rows. That takes care of the 12 people that they all have over on a regular basis. If you still want to have a third row in case there's even more people, I would deprioritize the third row. And so now we've got, top fronts that are a little in front of the front row. I would say top rears that are directly over the third row. That's going to be still totally fine. And then top middles that are, of course, in between and will work well for everybody. The side surround speakers, I would probably still just have 2 pairs of side surround speakers. I'd have one that's a little behind the front row and a little behind the second row. But if you ended up with 3, it doesn't really matter. Those are all actually getting the same signal. So you don't need more channels. Yeah. That's maybe just more speakers. So in the end, I see no reason to go beyond a 16-channel processor. I wouldn't mind having front wides in this setup because I think you're going to have the room size where front wides make sense. But if you didn't have front wides, I also wouldn't worry at all about it. So that means you could go as simple as a Denon X6700H or whatever replaces it, because that does the 6 overheads, but that would be 7 floor level speakers. If you went with a monoprice HTP1 with the 16 channels, now you could do front wides and 6 overheads. I see no reason to go beyond that. That's already spendy territory. But yeah, I see no problem there. I'll leave it to you whether you want to have 2 pairs of side surround speakers or 3 pairs of side surrounds. I would stop at 2, like I said, and maybe front wides, maybe not. So that's where I am.
I guess my problem, I guess the other thing to consider is where is that third row of seats in relation to the back wall as well? Because you're talking about a very big room, no matter how we look at it. So if your back row is going to be on the back wall, that row doesn't count for audio. Right. As far as I'm concerned, that row is just there for overflow seating for people you don't like, or for yourself, which is what happens in my home theater. I let everybody sit in the good seats, and then I sit in the very back if we have so many people over, which has not happened in quite a few years. So if you want to have the 7 floor level speakers, having a side surround that's almost in the back corner there is not good. So I would try to put some space behind that back row. If you cannot put space behind the back row, then definitely the back row doesn't count. Yeah. So as far as for audio,
in total, I don't think in this theater, like you're saying, the room is there, the budget is there. That's not really the concern.
Right.
So I don't think I would end up with fewer than 15 speakers. That would be 13 channels, but 15 speakers, so that would be 2 pairs of side surrounds. That's where the extra comes in. I could definitely see as many as 17 speakers and have those front wides going. Possibly as many as 19 speakers total. That would be if you did have 3 pairs of side surrounds. It's not out of the question. Maybe the room's big enough, you have sufficient room behind the third row. But I would prioritize the front 2 rows. I would try to put 6 seats in each of those front 2 rows and be like, that's what we're really focusing on here. And then I would have 2 pairs of side surrounds. I'm going to be honest
with you. Before we really go on, what I would recommend you plan on doing is essentially what we talked about with, I don't remember when, which was fabric the entire room.
Oh, yes.
Like
that's
every
coming up.
wall.
Yeah.
Okay, every wall should have a build out of like 2 inches minimum and fabric that covers all of that. So that
let's go for 4. If we or a 2x4. The depth of a 2x4.
Yeah. I would at least do 2, and that's because I want to put a 2-inch panel behind it. But
at minimum,
4-inch panel would be better. But basically what you're trying to do is this way, if they do decide to upgrade literally anything, you don't have to worry about drywall patching or running cables or going into attics. It's literally all accessible. Yep. And that is the number one thing. So you should plan on false wall up front. You should plan on every wall in there having acoustical
essentially,
fabric over
every wall is a false wall. Like you're going to build the shell of the room to the soundproofing, whatever level of soundproofing you want. You build that shell of the room. And then I would just literally have 2x4 framing within that shell of the room, and all of that 2x4 framing holds all of your acoustic treatment, all of your speakers, all of your wires. It's all accessible, and all of it is fabric covered. I completely agree with that.
So Michael's heard us say we recommend covering about 30% of the room's surface area with acoustic treatments, but we said to focus on absorption. He was listening to Anthony Grimani, interviews about room treatments. He also seemed to land on 30% coverage, but focused on an equal mix of absorption and diffusion, so about 15% each. Michael is just trying to square the differences in his mind. Can we help him out with that? So Anthony, for the most part, and we talked about this a number of times.
Well,
about
in fact, I will just refer you, because he might not have heard, I think it was 2 episodes ago.
Yeah.
We will put the link in there because we really went in depth about absorption versus diffusion, and we specifically mentioned Anthony Gramani and the types of room sizes that he does, which you're into that territory. We're not saying you're not into that. You're into that territory. So, we'll link back to that because I think we really actually did cover that very recently in depth.
We did.
Rather than going through all of it again. But the other point I wanted to mention is you have to be aware that when Anthony Gramani is talking about his diffusion treatments, they are combo absorption diffusion treatments, because that's all his PMI company sells when it comes to diffusion is combo. It actually has the absorption with some diffusion on top of it. So he's still talking about covering 30% of the room in absorption. It's just that half of that also has diffusion on top of it.
Right.
So I don't think we're nearly as far apart as
maybe it seems
indicated, because when he's talking about diffusion, it's always combo diffusion and absorption.
Yeah, and if you do what we've already talked about, which is basically false wall every wall.
Yeah,
you have the ability to say there's not enough of blank. Buy a few more panels. Or buy a diffusion panel and throw it up into wherever.
When we get into these larger rooms, it is the fact that, like, if you're talking about 30% of a quite a bit larger room, like, that is a lot of absorptive material. Like, you just think about it, as the room gets larger, the percentage stays the same, but it's a lot of absorptive material. You still need that, but you can start getting to the point where, it's starting to sound kind of dead in here. You've got all especially if you do have 12 people or more, because the people absorb high frequencies as well. So, we get into that territory where having some of that diffusion does start to make sense. We're not against that. But realize that when he's talking about 15% diffusion, that's 15% combo diffusion. That also includes absorption. So we end up on the same amount of absorption.
Right. Michael's heard us say we recommend... no, I already said that one. Michael's parents do not want any of the speakers to be visible. That's good, because
Solved.
I solved that one already.
Yep.
Obviously, for a room this size, it will be a projection setup, so he's trying to plan for the equipment. Do we agree that with going with a JVC projector, do we think they should get an NZ7 or would the NZ8 be worth it? So we don't exactly know the room size, and we don't exactly know what's how big of a screen or how big of a field of view your parents prefer.
Yeah.
That is the question that you need to answer before we can answer this question, believe it or not. And the reason, we can tell you what we think, but it will be all moot if your parents are like, this is way too small or this is way too big.
Right.
You need to find out where they sit in the theater.
Yeah. It is as simple as asking them, when you go to the movie theater, where do you like to sit? Do you like to sit really close to the screen? Do you like to sit right at the back? Because the thing is, you are going to have multiple rows of seats, at least 2 that are prioritized. So if your parents...
Just take them to the movies. Sure. You know what I mean? Just take them to the movies and see where they sit.
If your parents prefer... if your parents prefer to sit close to the screen in front of the halfway mark of the theater, that's pretty easy. They're going to sit in the front row of their home theater, and you can get that quite easily. If they prefer to sit close to the back of the movie theater, maybe it's as simple as, hey, some of their guests like to sit closer. Let the guests sit in the front row, and your parents actually prioritize the second row. That's where they prefer to sit. So that can absolutely work. But when we are talking about a theater that's going to be at least 2 priority rows of seats and maybe a third row as well, and we're talking about, I'm trying to edge you towards, 6 seats wide, this is probably going to be a minimum 135-inch screen and very likely could be pushing 150 or 160.
Right.
Now, 135 with a JVC projector, chef's kiss. It's all going to be fantastic. I'm not going to steer you away from a JVC. I'm not really going to steer you away from a JVC in either event, but just be aware, once you go past 135, which is totally plausible in this room, just don't expect HDR to actually look different from SDR. You're just not going to have the lumens for HDR to look significantly different from SDR anymore once you get to 150, 160. A JVC works fantastically at 150 for SDR. Okay? For SDR nit levels, it works great at 150. That's not a problem. You can absolutely have a 150 or a 160-inch screen in here. Just be aware that it's going to be SDR. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's still going to be an amazing movie experience. So that's the only thing to be aware of. I don't see a big reason to go for the NZ8 over the NZ7. Like, I just don't see it. I don't care about wobbling the panel twice versus 4 times for 8K. I'm just not worried about that. I'm not going to use the wobble in either case. I'm just going to rely on regular 4K resolution. And, like, so it's the color, right? They're saying the NZ8 is slightly wider color. It's just, you're not going to have them side by side. I'm just not worried about it.
Right. Again, it's a specs thing. You can look at the specs and say, yes, this is objectively better than the other thing. But in your room, between the time it takes you to take down the NZ7, put up the NZ8 and calibrate it and, do all this stuff, your parents are going to sit down and go, it looks exactly the same.
Yep.
I mean, it looks no different to me.
Yep.
And that's really what it comes to me. That's what I would be most worried about is the screen size more than anything, is because, and that's the thing you have to get right, because nothing will make somebody hate their home theater more than motion sickness.
Yeah.
So, or feeling like they have to squint to see something.
That's right.
So you need to really get it right as far as, and like I said, if they prefer an overly large, what I said, like what Rob just said, if they prefer an overly large screen, then you prioritize the front row for their viewing experience.
Yeah.
If they like an overly small screen, you prioritize the viewing experience for their second row, and then we do the calculations on the screen size based on that, because they are on statistically on one end of the spectrum or the other. And then if they are like right smack dab in the middle and they like, 35 to 45 degree field of view, say a 40 degree field of view, which is, pretty wide, but not too big. It's not like huge. It's not just tiny. Then you just ask them, do you want to sit in the front row or the back row?
Yeah.
And then we can calculate the room size. We can calculate everything based on that.
Yeah.
So that's what you have to do. So he has no idea about what screen to get. It would seem like acoustically transparent is in order. What do we suggest? If you don't want to see speakers, then yes, acoustically transparent is in order. Again, you can save some money here if they are sitting far enough away. But generally speaking, if you're going to be going for this quality of theater, you probably don't want to skimp on the screen. So the Seymour AV is the one that we always recommend, and I know because I can see the link.
I don't really foresee that even the front row is going to be closer than 10 feet in this theater.
No, I don't either.
This just doesn't feel like a theater where you're going to build it with the front row closer than 10 feet. So, Seymour AV's Center Stage XD material is going to be great. And you're going to want to... This is a case where, you do want the gain as high as you can get with the acoustically transparent. You don't really want to take any hit on the gain. The Center Stage XD comes out to like a flat 1.0 gain. So that's totally fine up to the screen sizes we're talking about. You're not going to see the weave if you're 10 feet and greater away. So I'm perfectly happy with that. I will say, if they want to do anything with aspect ratios, if you want to have masking, if you want to have motorized masking that comes in from the top and bottom or from the sides or all four, if you want all four, we're going to point you over to Seymour Screen Excellence. That's their installation arm. They have motorized four-way masking. If you want to go up to that, they have it. They, of course, have motorized two-way masking as well. We don't know enough about the situation. This is something that you can discuss if you want to have the motorized masking, but it's going to be Seymour anyway. That's where we're going to point you. They got the fantastic acoustically transparent screens, and go for their Center Stage XD.
I will say, and I have, we talked about it in this podcast before, but I think that, having a fixed aspect ratio for a movie and TV shows, that's going the way of the dodo as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, everything's changing now. There's a lot of 2.0. There's a lot of 1.8 to 1. My recommendation would be go 16 by 9 and just leave it. Just be fine with that. And with the JVC, those black bars are going to be pretty darn black.
They won't be absolutely black. They'll be pretty black.
They'll be pretty darn black.
So, if if your parents start talking to you about that, well, should we get this size screen or this size screen, and there's different things. The reason to get, obviously, I believe that the 16 by 9 is the way to go, because the majority of content that most people watch these days, which is streaming and TV, that's all 16 by 9. Almost all of it is 16 by 9. And then everything else can just have its black bars. But then as aspect ratios for movies, I think are going to start changing more commonly. Having a screen that or even masking, even paying the extra for the motorized masking, it's not going to change in the middle of the movie. That's not going to be something that you're going to be able to adjust.
And it's definitely not a case of it's either 16:9 or 2.35 to 1. We've got all kinds of ranges in between happening these days.
Yeah. So I would say that right now is a bad time to start thinking about masking and
because you don't want to like mask it down to 2.35 and then it's 2.0 to 1 and you got a bunch of the movie cropped off,
So Michael owns Revel speakers. He immediately thought of sticking with a Harman brand, either Revel or maybe JBL Synthesis. The Synthesis stuff is pricey. It is very pricey, but it is good. Again, it's not out of the question that there's even the option to go entirely JBL Synthesis with their rebadged Trinov processor, Synthesis amps, all in-wall speakers, and seemingly overpriced subs. But he was thinking, it's not seemingly, but he was thinking more along the lines of ATI amps and JTR subs. Do we have any strong feelings about what speakers, subs, and amps he should recommend for this theater? So, again, we are unsure of this room size.
The entire size, We're just mainly going on seating, that we have a rough idea.
Right. We have I can envision what I think that you're going to have in here, but you may have this, or they may have this vision of a room that's 30 by 60.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. I mean, even with false walls everywhere, you're not taking off that much space, and you still have to fill all that space up with sound. So we may be pushing you towards like compression tweeters and like really high.
Don't know if we're going that far into things. But.
I know, but we could in theory. But in order to really know what speakers to recommend to you, I would want to know the room size first.
Sure.
And the seating distance so that we would know.
But I will say, if this is because he's still in the planning stages and considering things.
Yeah.
I would not be the least bit against an all monoprice monolith system. Because if you were already thinking ATI amps, the monolith amps are made by ATI, and that was absolutely where I would point you. The HTP1 processor from Monolith, it's got the 16 channels that you need, and the room correction and the bass management and the way that they matrix things together in a way that I think makes sense and nobody else seems to be doing, and curves of equal loudness plus Dirac. I'm like, they've got all the things I would look for, so that would be a great processor choice. Then, if you want to go all in-wall, THX certified ultra in-wall speakers from Monoprice Monolith, including the new even larger ones that you might want for the front speakers that have the gazillion drivers and probably
I'm not
actually
in love with in-wall speakers. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not in love with in-wall speakers for this application, especially if you're going to have basically false walls everywhere. I like the idea of having and on walls or just regular old speakers that you just hide.
But I mean, since it's all false walls, it's so easy to build all the in-walls there.
Oh, you mean into the false wall?
Yeah.
You see, I guess my thing is I would rather just be able to take whatever speaker is nailed to the wall or sitting on a little shelf or whatever, and just pull it off and move it to the next location. But
well, I mean, you could still do that with the Monolith THX regular cabinet speakers. You could do that too.
Right.
But like to me,
that's what I'm saying.
I would do the in walls within the false wall part. They would just be covered by the fabric, and then that way you can build the backer boxes really easily because it's all within the false wall part. So I don't have any problem doing that. But I'm putting it out there that I think an all monolith system here completely makes sense. I could easily get him into that.
One of the things that will help you, at least, and we're not normally very bullish on the THX anything, just because the THX doesn't hold very much water or weight with us. The THX certification, like on receivers, doesn't really mean much. Doesn't give you a whole lot of information that I couldn't have discerned from just looking at the specs. But at least with the speakers, you're going to be able to look at the speaker certification level and say, this speaker has been tested and will hit reference level with the proper amplification in a room that is the size that is dictated by the so if it's the THX Select, THX Ultra, or whatever they are, Dominus or whatever they are these days.
Dominus is the biggest now. Yep.
You'll be able to look at the room size that you're planning on doing, and remember, just because you have a false wall doesn't mean you get to subtract that amount. It's the entire space that's in there. You'll be able to look at that and say, yes, these speakers will definitely hit reference level, and then you can buy with confidence.
Yeah.
So this is one case where I would say, because for most people in most rooms where their rooms are tiny or relative, like 13 by 15, Mr. wants to get, power sound audio subs, any speaker will hit reference level. Like anyone will do it with any amp. But in your case, we are a little bit more concerned of whether or not they're going to be able to hit reference levels. So the THX certification can help you decide.
Monolith subwoofers, too. They've got some big output subwoofer options, including dual 15-inch driver models if you want to go that big. So given the price and that all of this is going to be hidden, because, the looks of the Monolith isn't great, but it's all going to be hidden. It's all going to be behind fabric. So... yeah.
And this is one of the cases, too, where you're like, oh, I want, you're already talking about 4 subs. I'm like, do you really need 4 subs? In a room this size?
You can, one in each corner, and it's built into like a column-looking thing, so you don't even see it with fabric covering it.
You could definitely do it, or you could go, I've got columns in all 4 corners, but 2 of those columns have got subwoofers in it, and the other 2 are just wired for it just in case. You know what I mean? And you could test it out and maybe save some money that way. Not that your parents seem to be wanting to save any money. How much time
I'm hoping we can do 2 more just to get the...
unless this question is real short, which it doesn't look like.
It's pretty short.
We'll see.
It's not really that.
Jack has an Epson 5050 UB, and you can tell my voice is going, by the way. It's been going for a while now. And he'd like some basic instructions on how to set up the contrast brightness settings. Is there a YouTube test pattern there's a test pattern on I think he's talking about something else. Or does he need a disk or to connect to his PC? So he's looking for test patterns to set the brightness and contrast. We used to always talk about doing this with the THX discs from Disney.
Yeah. That was like DVD.
Yeah,
Not
that's
even
a
Blu-ray.
long time ago. Not that wouldn't work still, but
no, there's YouTube patterns from Meridio that will absolutely do this job. You're looking for the black pluge pattern and the white pluge pattern. And just to quickly describe them, this is going to be when you're on SDR mode, because the question coming up about that, but when you're in SDR mode, you're going to use these black and white pluge patterns. Now, I'm showing them on YouTube here, so you could, actually you wouldn't want to use these because this is all compressed and bad resolution and stuff. Go to the original links. But there are the 3 boxes in the middle of these patterns. So on the black one, they're labeled as 15D, 16D, 17D. That 16D right in the middle, that is video black. And the background of this pattern is video black. So 16D right in the middle of this test pattern, when you're setting your brightness, should be invisible. It should blend right into the background. 17D, technically one step above black, is hopefully visible, but if you can't see it, don't freak out, because most displays have a little bit of black crush. What you're going to look at now are all the squares along the top of the pattern, 17D, 18D, and going up. And 18, 19, you want to be able to see those squares as being brighter than the background. So don't freak out if 17 is just as dark as 16, but 16 should be the same as the background. You might not be able to see the boxes that are lower than 16D. Those are below black. In the video signal, they are below black. And you are not actually supposed to be able to see below black content in your actual content. But a lot of displays will show below black signals, partially for calibration reasons, so that you can set them correctly. So those are all the boxes below the middle boxes, with the numbers smaller than 16D. If you see nothing there, don't worry. That just means your display is not showing anything below black, and it doesn't need to be correct. If you do see boxes that are darker than the background, that is also fine. You are seeing the below black part of the signal. On the white pluge pattern, again, you're looking at those 3 boxes in the middle, the 235D right in the middle, that is video white. All of the boxes above that, all of the values above that are above white information. All of the values below that should definitely be visible. White is a little bit different than black in this case. Being able to see information above video white is not a bad thing. This actually goes all the way back to the CRT days when there was such differences from display to display that they basically decided on, okay, that 235D, everything should be able to show that. If you can see above that, it's like gravy. It's not wrong, like being able to see below black in the video signal. It's just we're not going to like prioritize anything above 235 in that signal. So if you see the boxes that are whiter than white, that's okay. In fact, on a lot of modern displays, even if you set the contrast to its maximum, you still see the values up to like 245D. And that's totally fine. There are, in best practices, most calibrators think you probably should see some above white information, because if you're looking at like a cloud, you don't want it to like just suddenly fade to pure white. It's nice if it has some detail. Everything below 235D should definitely be visible. You should be able to see that 234D square as different from the 235D square. Otherwise, you have white crush. You have clipping if you are not seeing all the boxes below 235. So that's all you need to set your contrast and brightness. You can use those YouTube test patterns from Meridio. They work absolutely fine. You can also go to Meridio's test website and download their entire suite, massive suite of test patterns if you want to. And anything that can play back a JPEG will be able to show those to you. But for white and black, contrast and brightness, you can use the Pluge patterns on YouTube, and we'll have the links.
So what if you change his lamp modes? Will you need to set the contrast and brightness again? And what about when you change from SDR to HDR? Well, when you change the lamp modes, you will definitely.
Yep. Yep. You'll need to do it again if you change the lamp modes. But HDR, I did want to mention, you don't really want to touch the contrast and brightness setting because HDR, even if the picture mode name is the same, like even if it's cinema and then it's cinema HDR and you didn't touch anything, that cinema HDR picture mode is different. It is separate, and you'll notice that, like, let's say you set the contrast to 90 when you did it yourself on the SDR test pattern with the Pluge pattern. When you go to HDR, you'll notice that the contrast is pegged at 100. It changed on its own. And you shouldn't really touch that, because HDR signals are absolute values. This value equals this many nits. In SDR, it's a sliding scale, which is why we set our contrast and brightness. In HDR, it's fixed values, and there isn't really any reason to change it. So basically, when it goes into HDR, just leave it alone. Don't touch the contrast and brightness settings in HDR.
All right. He's using Philharmonic BMR monitor speakers. His room is well treated, and he doesn't feel as though he is missing any sound. The Philharmonic speakers are on the lower side of normal as far as their efficiency goes, 86.5 dB, and that's with 2.83 volts into their nominal 4 ohm impedance. He's got an outlaw amplifier powering them, and there's no compression or clipping or any problem driving them. Even with Disney Plus content, he pretty much never goes above about -12 on the dial. Years ago, he tried some clip speakers. He hated them. But there are people on the forums who just rave about JTR or Power Sound Audio or the DIY options for extremely high sensitivity speakers. It's put the bug in his mind they ought to try some, but then again, there are also people on the forums who claim that any of the high efficiency speakers can never be truly hi-fi, whatever that means. In the end, he knows he'd have to listen for himself, but to position his speakers properly, he'd need to take down his acoustically transparent screen, and it all just feels like a big hassle. He'd just like to hear our thoughts. Are there any generalized differences between lower efficiency wide dispersion speakers like his Philharmonics versus high output high efficiency speakers like JTRs, or is it all on a case-by-case basis that would require individual auditions? I mean, there's so many things. There's 50% of that sound that you're hearing is just your room anyways. So it's very hard. And that's, of course, just a number that people throw around, but it's not exactly correct. But your room affects the sound that you hear quite a bit. I think you answered your own question on a number of different occasions by asking this question. When you said you're not clipping, you're not hearing any, it doesn't feel like you're missing any sounds, and it's going to be a big hassle. That tells me right there that you don't need to go through this whole rigmarole.
Right.
86.5 is not that bad of sensitivity. You are getting that's 2 volts into
that's 2 watts
instead of
2 watts.
2 watts instead of a single watt. Yeah. So it is.
So it'd be like 83,
yes,
82 and a half
right?
with 1 watt, which, that's on the lower side of normal, but it's not like crazy.
But you're right. It is not the highest sensitivity, but you're not seeing that far away, and you've got dedicated amplifiers for these things. So what are you going to hear by getting a high efficiency speaker.
Well, see,
I don't know. I think you're going to hear the speaker.
It's
the differences in the speakers.
It's
not
the
the differences in
raves
the
that you
efficiency.
see online, right? Because people rave about it. But what you have to know, I'm convinced in all the videos and the write-ups that I've seen, what people think level matching means is I left the volume dial at the same place.
Yeah.
That's what a ton of people think volume matching means. They say, I set my old speakers with my AV receiver at -15, and then I set my new speakers with my receiver at -15, so I level matched them. And when I heard the new horn-loaded, high-efficiency compression tweeter driver speakers, they were so much more, and this is always the word they use, dynamic. They were so much more dynamic, which, again, people don't know what the word dynamic means in audio context, which is the difference between quiet and loud. I guess it is more dynamic when you have just turned the volume up by 10 or 12 decibels. Right? So the difference between silence and that is now greater. But they always say these new high-efficiency speakers are so much more dynamic.
I set the volume to the same volume on the volume knob.
Or I didn't touch the volume. I left the volume alone. And wow, what a difference.
What a difference.
That is not
louder.
Level matching. Level matching would be busting out your SPL meter and saying, I turned these original speakers and I had to turn them up to -10 versus the new speakers that I had to turn down to -20 to get them level matched, meaning the signal came out at the same volume. And then when you do that, it's remarkable that the dynamics are the same because the difference between silence and peak loudness is now exactly the same because you have actually level matched them. There is a place for high efficiency speakers. It's when you're in a big room sitting far away, because then you're
what we were talking about with our last
that's right.
questioner.
Then your lower efficiency, perhaps lower power handling speakers, if you've got some little satellite bookshelf speakers, they're not going to be able to fill a 60-foot room from 30 feet away. They're just not going to be able to do it. You're going to need something that is more efficient and handles more power than that. But in your setup, your speakers are every bit as dynamic, because I know that's going to be the word that got thrown out to you. Your speakers are going to be every bit as dynamic as the higher efficiency speakers, because you're going to set the volume level where you like to have it, which is already not even at full reference volume. Not really even close to full reference volume. So I would tell you, based on the things you said, don't worry about it. I know the fear of missing out. I know the videos that you're talking about and the forum posts that you're talking about where people said, what a difference, what a difference. And that puts the bug in your mind. Maybe I should hear this difference for myself. Yeah, if you leave your volume dial exactly where it is and make no other changes, putting some clip speakers in there are going to be way louder than your Philharmonics. I'm not going to argue that. But that's all it is. That's all it is.
All right, I can't believe I'm still doing this podcast right now. I am starving.
I'd love to just finish Infinite Gary's and then we're done. We're done.
Gary is not actually looking to buy a new CD player right now, but he's just been researching and looking into various disc players, and he came across the notion of a dedicated CD transport as opposed to a full CD player. The dedicated CD transport would just be an optical drive with a direct digital output, no decoding. Now, digital to analog, no digital to analog conversion, no preamplification, strictly reading the disc. Any reason why that would outperform a standard CD player? No.
I mean, that really is the answer. It's a single word answer. No. I mean, the only thing is if you have a disc player that's not working for some reason and somehow the CD transport is higher quality. This might have been a thing like way back in the day. Like these days, unfortunately, kind of all disc players are kind of crappy because nobody is putting any effort into optical drives anymore. And I think there's only 2 places that are even manufacturing optical drives anymore. So you're getting one or the other, and nobody's putting much effort into it. So, yeah, but that would be it. There's no, like, the ones and zeros aren't any better coming off of one of them than the other. They're either ones and zeros or there's an error.
Since the CD setup uses a strictly analog integrated amp, which disc player would analog out with analog outputs, will we recommend most highly? Are there any left that do this? I mean, it's all Blu-ray players, right?
It's all Blu-ray players, and that's what I'm going to point you to.
Yeah, unless you're going to buy a dedicated. I mean, I guess you're not going to do this, but you could just go and buy an old CD player at a pawn shop or a or whatever, and it's going to, chances are it's going to sound just as good as anything else because the DAC technology, while they have improved over time, it's still a CD. Those CDs have not changed that at all since the invention of them, and that DAC technology has been perfected essentially for a very long time. So you could just go and say, that one looks pretty, I'll buy it for $20 and take it home, and it's going to sound exactly the same as anything Rob's going to recommend. But knock yourself out, Rob.
Well, I'm just going to say, like, I'm not worried about, obviously, the reading of the CD and the outputting of the CD and the converting the CD's digital audio to analog. I'm not worried about any of that, but there are the ancillary things. There is the build quality. There's how quiet is the disk drive, how quiet is the player. I'm talking about, like, mechanical noise here. That's what I'm talking about. So on that front, there are some build quality differences. I would probably point you to Panasonic's UB9000. That's their flagship Ultra HD Blu-ray player, but it has a dedicated analog audio section in it. It actually even offers XLR analog stereo outputs if you want to go that far, which a person like Infinite Gary might. But it's the build quality of the thing. It's built like an absolute tank. Panasonic is using the best optical drives right now. Those are the ones that actually read 3-layer discs and don't seem to have problems like everybody else seems to be having. So I would point you to the Panasonic UB9000. The thing is, it is not a universal disc player. It does not play SACDs. It does not play DVD audio discs. If you want those things, you'd go over to Sony. Their X1100ES, similar idea. Built like a tank, crazy quiet drive, all of those things. I think even XLR outputs on that one too. It is a discontinued player now, though. They're not manufacturing any more of those X1100ESs, but you can still find them for sale, and those ones are universal disc players. They play SACD, and they even play DVD audio as well, which Sony didn't do that much, but they did with the X1100ES. So one of those two would be the one to get if you're crazy about analog and want all the built like a tank and quiet optical drive and all that.
Who do we have left?
We have Rohan, Daniel, Brandon, Jeremy, and another Daniel. I'm pretty sure that was a different Daniel because otherwise I would have combined them.
All right. We want to thank our listeners, all of you who are listening, and those of you on iTunes who can no longer listen. So.
You can still listen if you were already following. I think you can still follow. I think the subscribe doesn't work because that's a whole paid thing. It's a mess. We'll try to sort it out at some point.
I am trying to sort it out currently. It's just not going to happen because it's iTunes. I want to thank our 140 patrons over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast, including Will and Daniel.
Yes, indeed. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. And a big thank you to our 140 patrons, Will and Daniel. Thank you for being two of them.
So I want to thank Brandon for sending, I guess me, because you can't use some Movies Anywhere codes. So thank you very much, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon, for that. Thank you, Will, for alerting us about the iTunes thingy. So,
I'm sorry.
Podcast archives. So thank you for supporting the podcast, gentlemen.
And got some notes of gratitude here from Dan Gurinder, Michael Rohan, Brandon, J. Karl, Jeremy, and Martin. So thank you for thanking us.
Yes, indeed. I'll say the names one more time. Dan Gurinder, Michael, Rohan, Brandon, J. Karl, Jeremy, and Martin. We really do appreciate the notes of gratitude to us, the notes of encouragement. It's nice to have. So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
And to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.